morning, everybody. Welcome to Storytelling for LOWKeynotes. Excited to be here with you all. Before we get started, I just want to hear from you. I want you to popcorn it out. What's one thing you're hoping to take away from this session today? What's one thing you want to learn?
Storytelling.
What's one thing about storytelling? Come on.
How to make it engaging.
How to make it engaging. Great. What else?
How to be balanced.
How to be balanced. Okay. Great.
How to unknot the knot.
How to unknot the knot. Okay. I love that.
How
What
to
else?
effectively tie loose ends, like bring loose ends together at the end.
How to bring loose ends together. Got it. Okay. What else? What I want you to take away from this session today is this, that story is how we connect with the audience. Story is how we connect with the audience. It goes beyond logic. It goes beyond data. Story is about heart. It's the pathos in Aristotle's rhetorical triangle. So you need story to round out your low keynote. But if you tell a story that's not clear or doesn't connect with your message or is somehow not me talking all the time. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a bit of small group practice. Did everybody bring a 2-minute story to share? Yeah? Okay. If you didn't, there's a little bit of time that you can think about it. We're going to do round 1 of small group practice. Then I'm going to share some key points on storytelling with you. You're going to have some time to rework that story, change a few things about it, so that you can share it again and see the difference. Okay? All right. So let's get started with the small group practice. So if possible, I want you to work together with the people in your cohort. And I want you in groups of 3. Okay? If your whole cohort isn't here, you can find somebody outside of your cohort. That's fine. But I want you to work in those groups for the rest of the session today. Okay? So you're going to have 12 minutes. This is what we're going to do. You're going to take turns telling your 2-minute story, and then you're going to rate each other on the story's effectiveness on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 is, oh wow, this is such a great story. It really moved me. I'm going to remember it. And 1 might be something like, is this really a story? I'm not sure. Okay? So how do we tell if a story is effective? Well, there are 3 questions we can ask ourselves. First, does it grab your feedback, your stories, so we can move on?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, everybody, bringing it back. Bringing it back. Okay. All right, everybody. All right, we're going to move on. So, question for you. Show of hands, who gained a new insight from working on this story with your group as opposed to working on it by yourself? Raise your hand. Okay, great. Almost everybody. That's fantastic. Okay, so we've done round 1. You're going to get a chance to tell the same story again in round 2. But first, I'm going to share with you 3 key points on storytelling that are going to help you build really any story. It doesn't matter. This is basic stuff that can apply to any story. So let's get into that. 3 points. 3 points. Point number 1 is every story is a story of transformation. From being lonely to falling in love, from being an outsider to belonging, from being stuck to being in flow. There has to be a change in the story, or else it's not a story. I went to the store and came back is not a story because nothing actually happened, right? Nothing changed. So before you build any story, before you start working on the process of building a story, you want to ask yourself, what is this transformation that's happening? From what to what? And it sounds simple, but a lot of people forget to do this. So that's the first thing you want to ask yourself when you're thinking about creating any story. Point number 2 is every story, it's just a puzzle. There are just pieces that you need to know what they are and then be able to put them together. One of the most common problems I see when I'm working with people on storytelling is that they're missing key parts of their story. So their story ends up feeling flat or not cohesive, or it's just not moving, right? So what's cool about when you understand what all the pieces of the story are, you can get really creative in how you tell the story. For example, you can start at the climax where all the tension is, and then flash back. Or you can nest stories within stories because you're so clear about how all the parts relate to each other. So here's the narrative arc, right? These are the pieces to our puzzle. The red dots are the pieces to our puzzle. And we're going to go deep into those in a second. But before we do, little quiz for you. What does that arrow represent? What does that arrow represent?
Time.
Okay, it does represent time, and what else?
Emotion.
Transformation.
Transformation, right, exactly, transformation. So over time, there has to be some kind of change, right? And the more tension that's created, somebody asked, oh, how do we create tension in a story? The more tension that's created as we go, the more problems the hero faces, the more oxytocin gets released in the brain of the listener. So that's how they feel this trust, empathy, and most importantly, connection. Okay? So how much tension can you add that will increase that connection to your audience? So let's look at each of these parts. And I'm going to give you a handout after with the details so you don't need to scribble notes. So this is basic story structure. You've probably seen this before. You'll notice that some points are bold and some points are not bold. The bold points are the points that you have to include. You have to include, whether it's implied or whether you actually say it, you need to have those points clear. The points that aren't bold, they're nice to haves. They give your story some depth and texture and more interest. Let's go over story structure one at a time. So, the setup. Basically, 3 questions that you want to answer. When did the story happen? And I start with that because so many people that I work with, they tell a story, but it's just kind of a vague thing. It's not actually a moment in time. So we want to know what actually happened. What's the moment in time thing that changed the way you think about something or influenced your beliefs? So starting with when is good. Who is the hero? Every story needs a hero. And then what did they want at that time? We need to know the motivation, right? Because if we don't know what the hero wants, then we can't be excited or sad for them when they get it or don't get it, okay? Setup we want to get through pretty fast. Most people spend way too much time in the setup, and it drags. You want to move pretty quickly into the problem. Problems are interesting, right? Problems are interesting. We're problem-solving machines. We want to hear, okay, what's this problem that we're trying to solve? So we want to get to the problem fast. We want to know what's getting in the way of the hero getting what they wanted. And it's also important to know, how did that make them feel? We want to know the emotional landscape of the hero because it helps us connect with them. So a lot of people omit, they don't say how the person felt. But it's helpful because it makes you connect to that person more, to the hero more, to the story more. Nice to haves, again, stakes. In other words, what did they stand to lose if they didn't solve the problem? Give us a sense of what this means to them. And then the villain, it's nice to name a villain. Who or what was the hero up against? This could be an abstract thing. It doesn't have to be a person all the time. Some abstract thing that's easily hateable, like traffic or corruption. Those are villains too. Then we start going up the narrative arc. We've got the problem, of course, but then we're going up complication. This is a nice to have, but again, it builds more tension, right? If we can say, oh, and then there was this too, and then this got in the way, and then there was this, that creates more tension, and that helps us connect with the audience, because the audience now is empathizing. Oh, really? That happened too? Oh, that's terrible, right? All of that is building that connection with the audience. Then the solution. We need to know who or what helped the hero gain what they needed to solve the problem. Now, sometimes there is no solution. And if there is no solution, then what happens? The hero doesn't get what they want. That's also a story, right? So just because the parts aren't there doesn't mean that they're not there, if you see what I'm saying, okay? You need to understand the relationship of that solution to the rest of your story. Climax. Climax is very simple. It's just, did the hero get what they wanted? Yes or no? It's the fight scene. Who wins? Okay? This is the point of the most tension. It's where we get to the top. Oh, so what happens, right? That's that point. And then finally, and this is arguably, it's the part of storytelling that a lot of people leave out. And I say it's the most important part of your story. And that is, why did you tell us the story? Connect the dots. So these are the two questions. What did the hero learn? And what does the hero believe now because of this? One good way to test if your story works for your message is, does your main message go there? Does it work? Does it fit as a resolution to your story? That's how there's the connection, okay? So point number 2 is every story is a puzzle. Point number 1, every story has transformation, okay? Point number 3, pretty simple. Good stories include sensory details. And I would say details in general, but sensory details are really helpful. So, for example, I'm talking about what is the visual landscape? Like, what are you seeing in this story? What's being heard? What's the taste of the fruit that you ate at the time? It sounds very simple, but a lot of people forget to do it. And when you forget, people aren't able to get into your story. They're just kind of hanging back. But if you give them the details, they get drawn in. For example, if I say, and then one day a woman walked in a red dress, then you see the red dress in your mind, and you're right there with me. It's like a hook and a reel. I'm reeling you in, okay? So these are the 3 points. Honestly, it's not hard. Storytelling is not hard. The most important thing is to understand all the relationships with how the parts work together. All right, so this is Chelsea Harris from last year, and she does a great job with hitting all these points. So we're going to watch her video. It's a 2-minute story that she tells. And I want you to answer some questions. So jot these questions down really quickly so you can listen for them while we play the video. First question is, what's the transformation? Second is, how does she build tension in the story? Third, what sensory details does she use? And why did she tell us the story? So this is the connecting the dots part. Okay? All right. So we're going to watch this video and then get your answers on it.
Zach was a guy in college who everyone wanted to be around. He was tall, funny.
So what's the transformation in the story? What came up for you as you were watching it? What did she say? What's the transformation? From what to what? What do you think, Brian?
Someone who had it all to death.
Yeah. Yeah, at the most basic level, right? Someone who had it all to death, right? And this is a great example of there was no solution to the problem. And that's why he didn't solve the problem, right? Okay. Any other answers for this? You could say it in a lot of different ways. Okay. All right, so how does she build tension in the story? What were some of the things that came up? Yeah, Leah.
One thing she did was that she planted 1 year before his death, before she got there.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big moment.
Exactly. Great. Yeah. What else?
I
Megan?
was going to say a similar point, but she also said something along the lines of he seemed to have it all.
Yeah.
Implying that.
They're like, oh, what else? Why couldn't he be happy? What else was in the way? Oh, there's this, there's this, there's this. There's a laundry list of problems, right? So that's building that tension, making you empathize with this character. Okay? Great. Sensory details. What did you get? Sensory details. What did you see when she was telling the story? Yep.
How she describes that, how
Really, the power comes from what really hit you. What really has changed the way you think about life? What has changed your beliefs? That's where the good stories are going to come from. Okay? So it's challenging to move through the emotions to tell the story sometimes. Maybe you're still in the story. Maybe it's a little too raw. But the more times you tell it, the easier it gets. Okay? All right. Any questions so far? No? Yep.
Yeah, it's a slightly broader question, but I'm curious how to connect stories to other stories within the broader.
You could be telling a story that could pop you out to yet another story. Okay? You could pop out here, come back to this story, keep going. You could pop out at the end here, just go off into another story. Right? So it's like a map. You just need to know where you are. That's the thing. Because stories expand. And I mean, your whole life is a story, right? So where do you begin? Where do you end? You need to know, and that's where the transformation comes in. Oops, that doesn't work. That's where the transformation comes in, because each of these stories have a transformation. You need to know the transformation for your whole talk, your whole story, and then you need to know how these fit in to that story and the transformations that you're sharing within them. I would say generally that these points are going to be the same for each, because you all want them to be related, right? That's why it's so important to get clear on what your resolution is. That's your main message, essentially, for all of these. Okay? Great question. All right. Any other questions? Feedback you got from your group? I want you to clarify, what is that transformation? What are the puzzle pieces? I encourage you, and I have a handout for you. So on this handout, there are blank boxes. I want you to go through and actually answer those questions. The questions are on the back. Make sure you're super clear on this. Even if it feels rudimentary, you'd be surprised. I do this all the time, and half the time I am wrong about what my points are. So don't be so sure. Make sure it all connects. So you want to clarify the transformation of the puzzle pieces. Decide, hey, where am I going to add my sensory detail? Just throw it in like some salt when you're cooking. And then try a different way of telling it. Try a different order. If you started at the setup the first time, this time maybe try starting where the most juice is. Start at the climax. But maybe don't give it away and then flash back. Okay? How can you mix it up so you can tell it differently this time? One trick that I love doing, and then I'll turn on some music and let you guys think. One trick, my favorite thing in the world are Postit Notes. I really encourage you not to work on stories on your computers. And here's why. Because when you're at your computer, you're in this mode and you're like, you know, and you have a mode when you're on the computer. You are super efficient, I would imagine. You're all at Stanford Graduate School of Business. But it doesn't allow you to think creatively. It doesn't allow you to change things up if you need to. So I use a whiteboard or butcher paper and Post-it notes. And I put a Post-it note for each point on the narrative arc and I write what I think it is, and you're not writing long, detailed sentences. No, just write a bullet. Like, what is the problem? Oh, the problem is Zach caused athletes too much stress. Okay? Now, what's great is that once you get these clear, and sometimes maybe you need to, oh, wait a second, no, that doesn't work. That's not the problem. This is the problem, right? Allow yourself to change your mind, because stories they're kind of shapeshifters. You think you understand it, but you don't, all right? So allow yourself the space to move. And then once you're clear on how all these things relate, and they have to make sense, if you say it in a line, it has to connect, right? And then you can play around with, okay, I'm going to start with the climax first, and then I'm going to go to the setup, and then I'm going to go to the problem, and then I'm going to go to the resolution. Or maybe you could start with the resolution and then go to the climax. You know, you can change the way you tell it. So think about it as a puzzle, and think about it as a little bit of it's like a game. I see it as a game, really. But you can't play the game until you're. And we'll take 5 minutes. Same story again, but in a different way, with more clarity, maybe in a different order. You're going to add a sensory detail. Put into practice all the things that you learned today, or that you were reminded of today. Okay? So I'm going to stop the music, and we're going to take another 12 minutes in our groups of 3. All right. Is basically answering this question. Did you solve the problem or not? Simple yes or no. By starting with the climax, you don't necessarily answer the question, because then you kind of deflate the balloon immediately. Why should I listen to this story, right? But you can share what that moment of tension is without letting them know. So it's like you're on a roller coaster and you're about to go, you're about to drop, but you know that feeling in your chest before you drop? It's really intense. That's where you can bring people without answering that question. So the reason why I would want to do it's just a stylistic choice, really. I'm sure you've all seen films where, actually most films these days kind of start there. They drop you into this crazy action scene to try to get your attention, because we have short attention spans these days. If you don't answer that question, we feel uncomfortable as an audience. We need to know if it was solved or not. It's because all stories they're loops, like you have to tie them up. If you don't tie it up, like I said, it just doesn't feel good. So you have to answer that question. Is it yes or no? Okay, it's yes. You can end with the question and the resolution, but you need to answer that question to tie up the loop. Okay? And it's like that for if you're telling multiple stories inside your talk, and stories nested in stories, you always have to answer that question. Okay? Gina.
I think that there's a difference between the story and your presentation.
Yes. Imagine you're doing a narrative arc for your whole presentation. Like, that is the container for your presentation. You can pop out of your story and share data and statistics and other stuff all along the way. And then at the end of your presentation, you can end with that, I believe whatever. Like, that's your point. And you arguably want to start with that as well, so people know what you're talking about. But if this is the context of your entire presentation, then great, but it doesn't have to be, right? Your entire presentation can be made up of a lot of different things, and you can have stories as seasoning along the way. Okay, is that helpful?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Anything else? We're about out of time. Most people spend way too much time here, and it is super boring. Problems are interesting. So if you're going to do a more linear style, get this over with really fast. Just what is the problem? Like, let me know what the problem is, okay? Great, thanks, Andrew. Wow, that's the heart of your talk, okay? All right, break a leg, everybody, thank you.